Me that we're live on YouTube.
We are live with our first Friday innovation conversation for December 2020. My name is Krista Bailey. I'm the director of the Center for a Sustainable Future at IU South Bend. Happy to have you joining us today. Don't know what all I can say about this that they can't say best themselves, but this is, I'm really excited to have our guest today to talk about their project and how it really does help us see systems and how they interact and support one another in efforts to build a more sustainable society and future for ourselves and future generations. So we initially were hoping to have this event live and in person this past April. Of course, that did not work out so well. So what we've done is started to bring people to you every month to talk briefly about their projects, what they're doing that's so innovative in our region. So with that, I am going to introduce our speakers for today that were going to join us in April. So I'm really happy that you stuck with it and are here with us in December to share your story about the spring at small farms. So we've got two folks with us. One is Kay Westhughes. She's an artist and folklorist, and she's also been a sustainability fellow with the center. With a little extended fellowship with COVID. So that's bonus for me, at least, get to still hear about her work and support that. And joining her is a partner in the work that she's been doing with her fellowship is Alva Mohammed. She's with the Gary Food Council. So with that, I'm just going to step back and I guess, Kay, you're going to get us started and introduce what's going on.
Thanks, Krista. Yeah, thank you, Krista. I'm really excited to be able to do this after we've been talking about it for so long, and I'm really glad, Alva, that you can join us. This is a nice thing about Zoom. And you can see we have these pretty backgrounds behind us because we wanted to show you what the spring looked like and give you an idea of, you know, the surrounding, the beauty of it. And so what I want to do, I'm just going to talk briefly about the background of the spring and then turn it over to Alva, and Alva can talk about what's going on with the Gary Food Council and how they are involved, you know, with the spring. So I'm just gonna briefly talk about an artesian well, what artesian well is and why the Gary one's so special. And the artesian well is basically a spring that's coming from an aquifer that's pretty deep usually and is protected by impermeable layers of rock and clay. And that makes the spring pretty pristine. They're considered pretty pristine sources of water. And an artesian well is a little different from a spring because there's an opening in that impermeable rock. That geology kind of causes some pressure and the water comes up and you don't need to pump it. So it's sort of a miracle spring because you don't have to pump that water, it just appears. And the one on Chase Street in Gary, it's pretty close to IU North, if we were talking about that before we joined you. It's just a little southwest of IU Northwest, and it's on a street called Chase Street. And it's special because there aren't that many springs left in Indiana that are community springs. And a community spring is a spring that kind of serves as a public commons and that they're owned by private individuals generally, or sometimes public agencies, but the public is allowed to access the water for free. And so there's not that many. In my research, I've only found 26 left in the state of Indiana. So it's a special spring. And I really am interested in learning about why people still access public springs and how they stay in the public commons. And so to do that, I needed to talk to people. And so I started an oral history project with the support of the Calumet Heritage Partnership and the Center for Sustainable Future. And so with their support, I've been able, the project's just about, it's pretty much done now. I interviewed 21 people who either use the spring or in the past or use it now or were associated with some way. And I've learned a lot about the spring in the process. And all that information is going to go in the IU South Bend Special Collections in 2021. In January 2021. So I'm really excited to talk with Alva. I want to turn it over to her because she contacted me in June of 2019 and said, can you come to our food council meeting? I was like, yes, I want to be part of what you guys are doing. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Alva, for my quick introduction there.
Well, thank you, Kay. Again, so first of all, thank you for inviting me. I am always pleased and honored to be able to share information about the Food Council, information about Gary, and information about the artesian well, which we now call the Spring at Small Farms. So, just a kind of brief introduction. I am Alva Muhammad, and I am currently serving as president of the Gary Food Council, which is a community based organization of people who are interested in building a local food system in the city of Gary. Our mission is to bring improve access to fresh foods throughout every Gary neighborhood. And we do that through a combination of increased urban agriculture, improving access to locally grown and sourced foods, and providing fresh foods in stores and farmers markets throughout the city of Gary. And so you may say, well, how does that relate to a water source, right? Which was kind of the question that we would get. And it's because water is the source of everything. There is no agriculture, no food, no life without water. And so we felt that the fit would be appropriate for the Food Council to start to take up this work. Um, and in doing so, we learned just how important the spring has been historically in the city of Gary, and how it can potentially become a place of its own in the future of the city of Gary. And so that's kind of where our work overlapped. I had begun doing this work, and my research led me to Kay. Her name kept popping up in articles and newspaper pieces. And so I reached out, and the rest, as they say, is history. So that's kind of the big picture. And if I can just take a quick moment, what personally led me to this is that I moved to Gary in 2015. My husband and I had been living in Illinois, and he was born and raised in Gary. And he's like, you know what, I want to go home. Let's go and get a place in Gary and do great things. So the day that we closed on our house, we had no running water, no lights. We were waiting for everyone to come and connect everything. And I wanted to start, like, I was eager. And my husband just throws out casually, like, well, why don't we just go get some water over on Chase Street? And I just immediately thought, oh, well, it must be a convenience store or a grocery store or a dollar store or something, because what else could it be? And then when he explained that there's just water coming from the ground on Chase Street, I thought he was insane. And he kept talking about it. And then he took me to the well. And he's like, no, people just come here and they get water. And when we were there was a truck, and a guy pulled up in his pickup truck, and he had several big containers, and he went to the well and he started filling one up. And I was like, wow, people really use this. And ever since that day, I have been fascinated by the well and wanting to learn how we can turn it into a destination for people. So here we are. So that's kind of my introduction. So, Kay, do you want to take people through the next steps?
Yes, well, what I've learned, a lot of what I've learned about the spring is it sustained a lot of people for decades, because the communities surrounding, the reason it kind of became named the Spring at Small Farms is because no one could give me a name for the spring out of all the people that I interviewed. People just called it the spring or the well. And so because it was located in the small farms community, I kind of stuck, the Spring at Small Farms. But that community had to rely on the spring because they didn't have, running water or good wells in their homes. And also partly because there was a Superfund site in the 70s that polluted many of the wells in small farms in neighboring Black Oak communities. So that spring remained, pure and safe to drink. And that in itself, I think people consider that a little miracle. So yeah, it has a very special place in the heart of a lot of citizens that relied on it during the 50s, 60s, and 70s for about 3 decades. The problem now is, though, that it's on a street that's a dead-end street, because Chase Street has been closed due to the street kind of deteriorating, and they weren't able, it was kind of built over a marsh, and so it's kind of sinking, and they closed it. So now there's a lot of illegal dumping on that street, and that's one thing that I think needs to be addressed. But I think making it into a destination will help with that, because once attention is paid to the place, I think that problem will stop happening. But that's the issue that is the concern of I think everyone involved, is to make it a safe and easy place to access. Is that fair to say, Alva? What are your thoughts on that?
I would agree. I think Chase Street, for people who are not from Gary, just a bit of, this is how you get there without a map. It's really easy because 8094, the interstate, runs right through Gary. And if you get off on the Broadway exit, like you're going to IU Northwest, and you take Broadway south to 30, well, you can take it two ways. If you're on, let's keep it simple. If you're on Ridge Road, if you take Broadway to Ridge Road, you go west on Ridge Road, and when you get to Chase Street, you make a right. And before the road ends, because of the instability that Kay was talking about, and I'll talk about the efforts to rebuild Chase Street, you'll look over to your left and you'll see what looks like a little tiny low spot next to the side of the road, but it's actually a driveway that has been built by cars coming in to the well on their own after, throughout all of the years. And at the bottom of the little indent, you'll see this, I hope you can see me pointing to it, this block of concrete with water coming out, and that is the well. And so for years, people have just had to kind of know that it's there. But they come from as far away as Valparaiso and Illinois to load up with water and use it for drinking. But the issue, or one of the issues that Kay said, is illegal dumping. So because it is not a destination at this point, sometimes people use it as a place to engage in illegal dumping. And so every so often, the city of Gary or Lake County will come through and they'll clean up everything that people have dumped there. But surprisingly, even with that, the water is so pure. The water is so clean that if you look around the area, there's natural milkweed that grows in the offflow from the well. There's watercress, which costs a lot of money at Whole Foods, but it grows there naturally because the water is so pure as it flows from the well. And so when they clear out the illegal dumping, you can really see the natural beauty of the area. And that's what we're hoping to highlight as we move forward. So I hope I answered your question, Kay.
Oh, yes. And also the agency that owns that property, the Little Calumet River Basin Development Commission, they are turning that area, it's a flood control area now, and they're turning it into a natural resource for people. They built some bike paths through there. There's hiking paths you can take back through there. There's a bald eagle's nest back there that you can walk to. So it's a very beautiful spot. It's just a very beautiful area near the Little Calumet River. So yeah, I think the street be incorporated into that as well.
And there's a kayaking, but it's actually a very peaceful spot within the city of Gary. As you mentioned, the Bald Eagle's Nest and the Little Calumet River walking trail is absolutely gorgeous. And there's a kayak launch. So if you're into kayaking, you can actually park on part of Chase Street, walk the trail, and launch your kayak into the Little Calumet River. And so, oh, look there.
Yeah,
there's the river behind you.
Yeah, that's just about half a mile from the spring, right? Is that about half?
Yeah. And Chase Street itself. So as part of the redevelopment effort, the commission has rebuilt Chase Street for foot and bicycle traffic only. So because it is built on a marsh, it's not going to be open to car traffic, but you can park on either side of Interstate 94 and you can still reach this area on bicycle or by foot. And so tucked away right in the middle of the city is this little tiny oasis in the middle of this giant urban area. And if you get thirsty, you can go get water.
And it's always cold.
Always.
Yeah.
And it always flows. So even during the polar vortex that we had a couple of years ago, that water never freezes. It still flowed even during the polar vortex.
That's amazing.
And I think that speaks to why it's been so important as a source of drinking water for people in that neighborhood because it was reliable and it was clean. And if there was no city or municipal water, you really need your drinking source to be reliable and clean.
Mhm. Yes, you do. Also, it's sort of a social place too. Sometimes, what I've heard, people would meet each other at this, talk at the spring with their neighbors. I've heard that from some people. Back when it was used more heavily, by people. Another thing is that whole area used to be truck farming. And part of what I've learned through my interviews is the area directly surrounding the spring was used for growing gladiolas. And so gladiolas were like, all surrounding the area behind the spring, which I have this nice, beautiful vision of it in my mind. But that whole area used to be used as truck farms, vegetables mostly, and some flowers. So I think that's really interesting as well. Now it's gone back to flood use for flood control. But that's something that you guys are interested in as well, right? The idea of urban farming.
As a means of flood control and economic redevelopment, yes.
Yeah.
And so it ties in, it really is a system when you think of it. Most people, when you think of urban areas, you don't think of it necessarily in terms of the ecological systems that are involved in it or within it. But this is a really good example of some of the relationship. And I mentioned some of this. We were talking before our broadcast, but most of the city of Gary sits below the level of the water level of Lake Michigan. And so much of Gary is a flood plain, and we sit on sandy soil. And Ridge Road, which runs east to west through the very southern end of Gary, is called Ridge Road because it's a natural ridge that divides higher ground from that former glacial area that used to be Lake Michigan. And so it really is kind of an ecological subsystem that the city of Gary was just built on top of. And so managing floodwater and runoff is a big issue for Gary. And urban farming, urban agriculture is a way to slow the runoff from rains because our streets flood every time it rains. And so using that as urban ag as a way to help manage floodwater and to prevent a repeat of the flood of '08 that we also were talking about, that everybody who lives in Gary at that time will never forget. Um, but it all ties in together, and it's effective use of the resources that we have in Gary and using every tool that we have to combat um, the pollution of the water from the contaminants from the heavy industry that's in and around Gary. And so it all feeds in together. And so there are a lot of natural pollinators that surround the artesian well on Chase Street. And those pollinators serve a bigger purpose for urban ag throughout Gary. So it really all is tied in together. And it's beautiful.
Systems, seeing the systems. Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Exactly. And that's where I'm going to pipe in because I'm just seeing so many beautiful pieces come together here. That's really exciting to hear and because we only have about 10 minutes left. And I know I've got some questions and I suspect people watching may have questions as well. But you've talked about this, the economic impact of this spring, that especially like for you, Alva, you moved into the house. How are you going to get water? You thought you'd have to buy it, but no, you didn't have to buy it. You could just go get it. And it was a healthy source of water that people have relied on for a long time. And of course, you've talked at length about the environmental impacts of this, and really also the unique geologic history here. So a lot of things coming together around what, well, frankly, is sort of a humble site here, right? It's not glamorous, but it actually is pretty glamorous if you know what you're looking at. So it's been really exciting for me to hear this story today. But I was wondering, Kay, as you started this project, when we first were talking about this, I immediately was struck by all these elements coming together and how this is really a unique sustainability practice, and that helping to uplift these stories and this example was an important thing to do. And it's been really cool watching it evolve. But I'm wondering if you could speak briefly about some of the deeper history behind this well, because I thought that the the early use and community around this spring was really fascinating. I was wondering if you could share that real quickly.
Well, sure. I can say that there used to be a number of springs in Lake County that were used. There was one just a few miles west of it, almost due west of it, called the Black Oak Spring, which Alba and I were trying to investigate where it was. At one time, we saw an ad. I saw an ad for it, but I finally located where it is. And it was another community spring that was used for water. People would drive in. It was in the front yard of a house, and people would drive in this little U-shaped driveway, get their water, and drive out right in the front yard of this house. So it was one of several springs, but I traced it back as far back as the 30s from a family whose descendants used to farm that area. They had it as a spring house, used as a spring house in the 30s, which is a place where you store, your cold items to kind of keep them cool, your perishables like milk and butter. And she didn't remember when, but at some point they piped it and took the spring house away. And so I learned that people just kind of learned about it through word of mouth as they moved up from the South, or maybe from some other place in Northwest Indiana, to small farms. It was sort of a word of mouth thing where people would just learn, just as Oliver learned about the spring from her husband. Someone would say, let's go get water. And people just sort of learned. If no one could tell me exactly when they first learned of the spring, but it was an important resource for all the communities because their wells were drawing from a different aquifer that was shallow and was rust, had a lot of iron in it. So the iron would leave an aftertaste and stain clothing if you wash your clothing in it. So it also was easily contaminated because it was a shallow well. So that's why the spring at small farms became more heavily used. And also Black Oak accessed it as well. Black Oak is a community just to the west of small farms that also was rural and somewhat, I would say, economically challenged. And so they also relied on their own, they didn't have municipal water, municipal sewers, or even a lot of the roads weren't paved at that time in the 50s and 60s. So yeah, those communities all relied on that spring for the drinking water. Did I answer your question? Or?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I just kind of want a little more backstory there. And there was a question about where's the Black Oak Spring? Did you find it? Was there an address associated with it?
It's on Calhoun Street. I don't want to give the exact address because it's a person's private residence, but there was actually it was bottled at one time and sold to the Hammond Pure Water Company, which was a company that used to bottle water around the turn of the century, about 1920s. They were really, people used bottled water in the 1920s. Because a lot of the communities there did not have municipal water at the time, or the municipal water was limited to certain parts of the communities, so they were selling spring water. And Black Oak Spring was one of them. There were several springs in that area that were being bottled and sold during that time. So the building where they bottled the water is still there, next to the house. And it's really incredible. Piece of history that a lot of people don't know about. They don't know about the springs that used to exist, and that the spring still flows, but it's been capped, so it's not accessible anymore by the public.
Well, that before I ask a question, which this leads up right perfectly into it, something that you said when you first started talking today, but I do want to comment that if you're watching us on YouTube and you have a question, please post it in the chat and keep an eye on that. So if you've got questions about this project, what it's about, what it means, I guess you won't get any specific addresses about other springs, which is fine. But my question, you had mentioned early on how it's important to keep this spring in what you called the public commons. And clearly the Black Oak is no longer, or wasn't for a long time. They were selling the water. So why is it important to keep, and maybe you both can comment on this, why is it important to keep this in what's known as the public commons, and maybe explaining what you mean by that too?
Well, the public commons is often owned by private people. That's one thing that is not understood so well, but a public commons resource is owned by a private individual, maybe an agency such as the Small Farm Spring. But that private individual allows the spring to be used by the public. And when I did my research in Kentucky on springs as part of my Western Kentucky University thesis project, I learned that sometimes that was even written into a deed, that the deed would say whoever the buyer was would have to continue to let the public use their spring. And sometimes that would be passed on through a deed or through an informal type of way. And I think it just speaks to the importance, and Alva, you can talk about this as well. I mean, the importance of water and how important it is to our sustenance. If we don't have water, we're in trouble, you know. And so I think that it just speaks to the importance of having free access to that resource. And it is in peril. It's being bottled more and more frequently by private enterprises or public water.
And I'll jump in. I think keeping the spring at small farms available, free and open to everyone is important. As a resident of Gary, the feeling that I have about it is that there's a civic feeling toward it, and then there's an ecological feeling toward it. And the civic feeling toward it is that Gary is my new adopted hometown, and we get such a bad rap for so many things, some of which is deserved, some of which is not. And so here we have this thing that is good, and it is clean, and it is pure, and it is all of those things that we should promote and feel proud of as residents of Gary. And I want more people to know about it and take pride in it and turn it into a place where we can come together as a community to rebuild some of those bonds and relationships that people have let kind of fall by the wayside over the years, and to make it a place where people from across Gary and from across Indiana and Northern Illinois and wherever can come and say, here's a piece of Gary that is great, and we want to share it with everyone. And it serves a real economic purpose. And this is, Gary is a very low income community. And it's the kind of community where it is not uncommon for people's water service to be disconnected because of non-payment. And when that happens, this is a place where people can come and get something that they know is going to be good and is going to be good for them until they're able to get reestablished and get back on their feet. And so it fills a very real economic need for a lot of people. In addition to that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I think you're getting there. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you had mentioned earlier that you have this vision of the spring as a destination, almost a tourist destination. So it sounds like you're moving in that direction, but I do want to hear more about that vision. And I know I've got a couple comments and questions to share.
Oh, okay. And I'll be very, so the vision, what we would like to see happen is we would like to see the area secured and lit properly with off-street parking that is safe and secure. We would like to add public art, and we would like to add increased access. The well has the ability, that main line can be tapped so that it springs forth in multiple places at once, so that more than one person can access the well at the same time without diminishing the water level underneath. And so we would like to see it connected to the Little Calumet River Trail. And we would like to have signage posted from the interstate so people can know how to come and reach the spring at small farms and turn it into a destination. Placemaking, I think, is the phrase that a lot of people are using to describe kind of the vision that we have for the spring. So I hope that was answering your question.
Yeah, that sounds, I can see it. That's great. I do have a couple things, comments that have been posted, just people really appreciative for the informative, inspiring, enriching presentation. People love learning about the collaborations that are happening here. Let's see, is it considered a holy place by anyone today or in the past?
Well, I can speak to 2 interviews that I had where I learned that the water was used in church services in the small farms. So, and I also had an interview where someone talked about more so, I guess, the medicinal purposes of it, but and that the fact that it, was a, I don't know, I think, well, yeah, I think there is some connection between sacred or holy and the water, just because of the fact that it was sort of like a miracle at that time. I believe that that water continued to flow and to serve people's needs. I heard one interviewer compared it to the spring and the Song of Bernadette. I don't know if anyone's ever watched that movie. It used to play every Easter on WGN. It was about Saint Bernadette finding a holy healing spring in France, and she said that every time she went to the spring when she was a kid, she thought about that movie and the sacredness of the water. So yeah, I think there was a connection that was made in some people's minds. Definitely.
Great.
My mind.
Yeah, I believe it. Yeah, it makes sense. A couple questions about the connections, and we're running short on time, so hopefully we can squeeze this in and then get to how people continue to learn more and be involved. But there's questions about this source of free, fresh, clean water and urban agriculture. Is this a unique phenomenon where they've got this close interlap, Alva? And is this, let's see, where is that question? I guess, what is the urban agriculture that's helping control floodwater right now? So kind of two questions about urban ag. Is this a unique partnership or connection? And where are these places? And maybe that can lead into how people can learn more and stay involved.
Well, I'll start with that one. The Gary Food Council has a Facebook group. We have a Facebook page. We have a Facebook group. Join the Facebook group, and that's where you'll get information as we move forward on ways you can be involved in updates. Urban agriculture, Gary has a huge agricultural history that most people now don't really understand or relate to because it's so heavily industrialized. But Gary has always been a place where people have grown food to feed others. The resurgence in urban agriculture, I think, is what's leading us to this move to make a place of the spring at small farms, because one of the bigger plans is to make the part of the larger surrounding area a site for education in the field of urban agriculture. We want to use it to grow food because food has been grown there historically, and use it to educate others on practices of like soil remediation and how to grow more food in small spaces. And then big picture, irrigation is not such an issue in Gary because we get plenty of rainfall, but just the fact that when there are periods of drought, there's this never ending source of fresh water is a miracle to me. I mean, just personally. And it's free and open to everyone. So you can literally, the guy that I saw the first time I was there had a pickup truck full of bottles that he just felt free to come and fill up all of his bottles, throw them back in the bed of his pickup truck and drive home. You can't get that anywhere. There's no place else that I know of nearby where you can just get as much free drinking water as you want for free. That's pretty amazing. And so as the source of everything, this water becomes more and more important no matter what you do, whether it's for cooking or growing or whatever it is, or for drinking, it's there and it's free for everyone. So I hope I answered both questions.
Well, and if you didn't, there's that Facebook group called what?
The Gary Food Council.
The Gary Food Council. There you go. So that's how you can find out more. And I feel like we're just getting started, and I want to just keep talking. And actually, I hope the two of you hang on after we stop our live stream for just a minute. But we are doing these talks. Again, we are going to do this as a whole series of compelling speakers. So this is just a snippet of all of the amazing things that are happening across the region. We are doing these on first Fridays. We're not going to do the first Friday in January because that's January 1st. But February 5th, we're going to be back actually with an interesting follow-up. So I hope that many of you tune back in for that to talk on growing sustainable urban landscapes. So a very related topic. And actually one of our biology professors here at IU South Bend will be speaking on that. So that is what's coming up next time we do this series. And that is all the time we have. So stay in touch with Gary Food Council and watch for more about the Spring at Small Farms. We'll be sure to be sharing more about it as the project moves forward. So thank you, Kay. Thank you, Alva, so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thanks.